The question is often asked, when will UFO disclosure happen? The answer is, it has already happened. It happened in 2001 at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where military, NASA, and intelligence agency whistleblowers testified to their involvement in the UFO cover-up and the back engineering of extraterrestrial technologies. It happened again in 2017 with the release of the film Unacknowledged, in anticipation of which the CIA and the FBI published millions of UFO documents on their websites. Despite all this, nothing has really changed. Life goes on as before, except there is a new narrative unfolding in the mainstream media, one that is designed to subvert true disclosure and extinguish the opportunity for transformation available to us through these revelations.
Earlier this week, the New York Times and Politico revealed the existence of a secret government program to investigate UFO sightings.
It was especially focused on encounters by members of the military, like this one experienced by a U.S. Navy pilot off the coast of California.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing. It's rotating.
Average people see UFOs, on the news, right? All of a sudden it's real. UFOs, we've been tracking them in the sky. And they go, okay, well, were the tinfoil hat people right? It took a long time for the mainstream media to finally admit that, yeah, they are in fact real. Why did we wait that long? Why did we wait for the mainstream media to tell us before we finally believed, hey, this is actually happening? And the challenge is, if there's potentially multiple narratives, how do you decide which one to go with?
Back in the 1990s, I was read into or briefed on a project that involved an interagency group that had the ability to disclose the ET presence in a way that would frighten everyone on Earth and convince the public that there was an alien threat, which is completely false. It's all a lie. And that this had been developed in the 50s, and they had been developing the means and the psychological warfare to make that happen. So in the 1990s, I wrote a paper called When Disclosure Serves Secrecy. And what that means is there are two kinds of disclosures that might happen. A truthful one that is also a hopeful one, which is what I gave up my medical career to try to actuate, do. And then there's the one that is spun by the spin meisters in Washington and at the Pentagon and CIA, which runs like this. It's true, the UFOs are real. They're here as a threat. They're violating our airspace. They're a national security and a threat to our sovereignty. I'm quoting.
The purpose of the program, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, was really designed to do just that. From a national security perspective, identify those things that we see and try to ascertain and determine if that information is a potential threat to national security.
And we knew this was going to happen because I had met with people who were in these classified projects, who were on interagency committees that had everything set to roll this out, and they were just waiting for the right time. The Soviet Union has ended. We have the global terrorism, while it's still there, it's not like it was around 9/11. This is the next big thing that they want the public to be afraid of.
When a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. Or like if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it's not that this isn't a genuine perception on their part, because they've been raised, their entire political and professional career has been designed to have this kind of artificial construct of this. There's this national airspace and nobody can come into the airspace unless we say so. And they've got this super control mechanism going. And they're right at this really important place right now where they're attempting to establish a kind of one world government. That they've gotten the communication systems up, the transportation systems up, and they want to establish a planetary government. And there's nothing that is going to motivate the creation of a one-world government, like the discovery of an ultimate other. Ronald Reagan, standing in front of the United Nations, he said it right out.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
He was silly enough to say it. You know, that's part of his naivete. But the fact is, that is their agenda.
Legendary civil rights attorney Daniel Sheehan has spent over 50 years fighting the national security state. The Pentagon Papers and the Iran-Contra scandals are but two of his many landmark cases before becoming a whistleblower and legal counsel for the Disclosure Project in 2001.
It's helpful, of course, for them to say, oh, UFOs are real. That's quite helpful. We've been trying to get people to understand that now for the last 30 years. But it's all immediately wedded to this fact that they're this horrible threat. And so we have to come forward with a positive set of programs, a positive vision for this. And that's what I'm trying to help get the Vatican and the Jesuit order to become involved in putting forth, a discussion about the theological and philosophical challenges that this presents to us. But it's not a national security threat. It's not a threat to our species. It's not a threat to our planet. It's a threat to our view as ourselves as the be-all and end-all, that the entire universe was created as a stage on which to play out the human drama of one single species. That ain't so. But let's get used to it, and let's figure out what the new story is. What is the new story? It is a positive story. What is our role in it? We may not be the star, of it, but we're a good supporting character in the unfolding of our universe. And let's figure out what that story is.
The success of Unacknowledged, which has been seen by hundreds of millions of people now.
Have you not watched Unacknowledged?
What is Unacknowledged?
You got to watch Unacknowledged.
What is that one?
Okay, you got to watch Unacknowledged.
What is it?
You got to watch Unacknowledged.
Is that Stephen Greer movie?
Caused a reaction within the intelligence community of the United States. And so what the major media has begun to do is to cooperate with the intelligence community in reporting all this information out, but with this peculiar spin, very subliminal at this stage, that it's a threat.
The project was called the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, run by an official named Luis Elizondo.
I think this is a national security imperative. We have clear things that we do not understand how they work, operating in areas that we can't control.
One of my first cases coming out of law school was for NBC to establish the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources. I did the amicus briefs for the New York Times and the Washington Post, and also for CBS and ABC. And it was at that time that I began to realize that there was this close working relationship between the board of editors of the New York Times and the national security community. That there's conversations going on all the time between the board of editors and the national security people. And we actually got an affidavit from Teddy Sorensen saying that, oh yes, the national security state and CIA and everybody consult regularly with the New York Times to get them not to tell information about covert operations that we're engaged in. I was surprised to find that out at that point. I began to do an investigation about this as the lawyer for the Times now and for NBC, and found out that there were 42 full-time Central Intelligence Agency or NSA people employed by the major national news media. And they had a whole entire project called Project Mockingbird. And that they were deeply embedded with the major national news media, and they were constantly, from their point of view, safeguarding the information that was going to be allowed to get out. And it was quite clear that they viewed themselves as all part of the same basic fraternity. They all shared in the patriotic vision of the Central Intelligence Agency being able to go around the world. The thing we had the biggest challenge with on the Pentagon Papers case is they didn't want to reveal the fact that there was a massive assassination program going on, and it was being funded by heroin trafficking, to keep it away from the congressional funding investigations, et cetera. I thought this was a terribly newsworthy thing to tell about, but it was beyond the pale. That was not to be talked about here. You can talk about how bad the Vietnam War was, and even the fact that they lied about the Bay of Tonkin incident, but not this.
Even the Air Force Office of Special Investigations officer, Richard Doty, admitted that he would bring bags of cash to national security editors in the major media to get their cooperation in this narrative.
So every news agency, every television, radio station in the Albuquerque or Santa Fe area had our snitches in there. So we knew, and we paid them. We paid them good money. One of the reasons you get the people is you pay them, and that was controversial. That was somewhat controversial.
Do you know of national media that have had?
Oh, yes, yeah. I'm not going to name them.
What you have now is a concerted effort between mainstream media, social media platforms, and tech giants to say, let's gain control back of the narratives that we require to make sure that we can control how people think about certain topics. So now you have this fear-driven, you have this tight little box of what the UFO and the extraterrestrial subject is really about, how it relates to military, government spending, weapons, all the sort of conversations that are very common in the mainstream that people are going to relate to, that okay, I can piece the typical dots together.
Let me give you a great example. If you look at a lot of the disclosure project materials, which is beyond the scope of this film, we identified dozens of people who were at intercontinental ballistic missile, nuclear silos, nuclear weapons areas, who had UFOs come in to those areas, surveilling them, but in some cases rendering those missiles unlaunchable. Now, most of the men that were in those silos have said to me personally, they felt that these ETs were saying, please don't blow up this beautiful planet. But if you do, if you go to mutual assured destruction, the full launch of nuclear weapons globally, we can intercept a lot of them so that you don't go to a full extinction level event. They felt that it was actually a very hopeful thing that happened. Meanwhile, people came along, took the same data, the same cases, and spun it into a national security threat. One set of facts, two narratives, diametrically opposed, opposite.
When I got involved in the issue of the UFO issue and the ET issue, starting in 1977 with President Carter, I realized that the work that I was doing was characterized by the national security state as a target for counterintelligence activities. When I see this thing happening with this To the Stars Academy, where they suddenly appear on the front page of the New York Times, and the CNN all of a sudden wants to talk with them, and they're on MSNBC and all this kind of stuff, I immediately kind of realized, wait a second, this is part of what I've been worried about coming out, because they were constantly spinning this story, that this is a threat.
My name is Tom DeLong. A lot of people know me from my band Blink-182. I started that band when I was 16.
Through a series of meetings, I was soon connected to a large group of U.S. government officials from the CIA, the Department of Defense, and Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. These guys were the ones involved in the secretive U.S. government programs that dealt with these subjects.
What's happening is the To the Stars Academy people, we're all, Jim Simivan, who's there, the chief of covert operations, domestic for CIA, which in and of itself is totally against the law. The National Security Act of 1947 completely, clearly, and unequivocally prohibits any kind of covert operation stateside. But here, that's who he is. And there he is there. And you got the guys from the DIA and the Defense Department and Hal Puthoff and stuff. And they're all there. And what they're doing is they're putting this intense spin. Every single thing they talk about all has this kind of gestalt to it, that this is a threat.
And it very well could be a threat.
It's a threat to our national security. It's a threat to our airspace. It's a threat to our sovereignty. It's what it is. It's a threat to our dominion over our own planet. And of course, they think that's their job. Our job is to assert full spectrum dominance over the entire planet. We actually have the documents from the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document, where they said that right at the dissolution of the Soviet Union, said, we've got to not cut back on our military spending. We have to increase it so we can establish full spectrum dominance over the planet. And so you know what their agenda is, the national security state. It's not for the defense of our sovereignty.
The danger of this, of course, is that this is exactly what all fascistic demagogues do to an innocent target, whether it be Jews in Germany or African Americans in this country. They will create sort of a boogeyman effect to try to get people mobilized against it.
You're one ugly motherfucker.
And as one member of a royal family told me, We need to do things so that the public will accept in blood and treasure the sacrifices needed to have an interplanetary war. I'm quoting.
Bombshell CIA documents, previously published by the Disclosure Project, reveal a decades-long psychological warfare campaign to cultivate a culture of fear towards extraterrestrials.
And it's interesting that Hollywood and the clandestine services are both spend most of their time convincing people that something that's not true is in fact true. I think probably Hollywood is full of CIA agents, and we just don't know it. And I wouldn't be surprised at all to discover that this was extremely common.
Intelligence assets within Hollywood have made billions of dollars popularizing the narrative that humanity's first encounter with ETs will be a devastating bloodbath.
Mr. Chambers, don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook.
Let's go out into space and look at our planet over the last 100 years. World wars, hundreds of millions of people killed in war, the advent of weapons of mass destruction, our going into space in a competitive way with the Soviet Union for the Apollo projects and others, the degradation and destruction of our environment, our targeting of extraterrestrial assets around the Earth and in space, and successfully killing many ETs and downing their spacecraft. Out here in Fort Huachuca in Arizona, there's an underground facility where there are 9 different ET craft that are there with all the autopsy bodies. There's a man on my team who used to work in that facility near Tombstone, Arizona, not coincidentally, perhaps.
This footage, captured by NASA's Discovery Space Shuttle on September 15, 1991, shows an extraterrestrial vehicle dodge an electronic weapon fired from Earth. Here, we see the craft slowly crossing the frame. There's a bright flash, and then it makes an abrupt right-angle turn and flies off. Moments after the turn, we see the shot fired across space where the craft had just been.
Knowing all that, if they were hostile in the way we think of an invading hostile force, that would have been made abundantly clear to us the day we detonated the first atomic bomb. The fact is they have shown remarkable restraint, almost a level of a Gandhian pacifism, not to have pushed back. So the threat isn't extraterrestrial, the threat is covert human. These secret projects are an existential threat to Earth, the environment, and to our peace in space and relationship with these civilizations. I remember being at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where a lot of the Roswell stuff ended up, and it was the Foreign Technology Division of the Air Force. And I was there to do a briefing, and the colonel said, well, what if these civilizations are a threat? He was trying to bring me into that view. And I said, sir, with all due respect, given the galactically stupid things you have been doing, if they were a threat, you would know it by now, and we would not be having this conversation and breathing the free air of Earth. It would have been point, set, match, over. What are the technologies that would permit an interstellar civilization to go from one star system to another? Now, we're not talking about Elon Musk's SpaceX or the Apollo rocket. We're talking technologically advances that are in the hundreds of thousands to millions of years past what we have operating on this planet. Those technological breakthroughs, if they were weaponized and in the possession of a hostile force, would be so devastating that you could target a planet and turn it into a pink mist floating through the cosmos if you were a hostile entity. What I have discovered in our contact with these civilizations, and we have had many hundreds of contact experiences with our CE5 teams around the world over the last 30 years, is that none of them are hostile, but quite a few of them are very concerned about our hostility and are doing things to try to contain that.
But our destiny beyond the Earth
is not only a matter of national identity, but a matter of national security. It is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space.
They want to project out into the stars their dominion. Our job is to get people to understand that that is not what our mission is as a human species. We need to lay back, participate with all other sentient life in the universe, and merit a proper position in the galactic federation, not be the big bully on the block.
Counterintelligence efforts reach a new level of absurdity with the staging of host events like cattle mutilations and alien abductions. In 2017, retired Air Force intelligence officer Richard Doty made history when he admitted on camera that unacknowledged special access projects within the military do indeed stage alien abductions to lay the psychological foundation for an interplanetary conflict sometime in the near future.
We did do that, yes. OSI did that. There was a special group out of the 7602nd Air Intel Wing at Fort Belvoir that came out and did that. They had these people that had maybe some sort of defects, anatomical defects that were brought in to fool people into thinking they're aliens. Yeah. I can't give you any specifics because the program is still classified, and they probably still doing it. I wouldn't doubt it. They were still doing it.
This corroborates what dozens of other insiders have disclosed to Dr. Greer, but they're too afraid to testify on camera.
Colonel, you're about to find out who your alien really is.
General Stahl! Some years ago, I had a meeting with the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, Hans Adam von Liechtenstein. He had reached out to me through some of his contacts. He said, look, Dr. Greer, we have to meet, but we can't talk about this on the phone. Your efforts to effect disclosure are noble, but they will not be able to be permitted, and not for the reasons you think. I said, well, this is interesting. Finally, we got together in New York City in July of 1994. He said to me, in 1989, a group of us were trying to do disclosure, and it involved Gorbachev, President Bush Sr., himself, and the UN Secretary General Pérez de Cuellar. And in the course of us putting together the high-level planning meetings to do this, Pérez de Cuellar, the UN Secretary General, was abducted out of his limousine in Manhattan. He was told by the aliens that if they did not cease and desist from their plans to disclose this information, that every world leader involved, including the President of the United States, would be abducted. This blew up like an atomic bomb in the Bush White House, and it did not go forward. I said, okay, well, tell me more. He says, well, we've concluded that we have to prepare the public for an interplanetary war. And in doing so, we can then also force the return of Christ. And I'm quoting. And I just listened. He didn't know that I knew that the means for that abduction for Pérez de Cuellar were run by a counterintelligence unit out of the national security state that had the technologies to simulate an alien craft and aliens run completely by military assets, and that there was a deeper part of these unacknowledged special access projects that were zooming even people like Bush Sr., who was on the committee but had lost control of some of these renegade factions. This is a very complicated story. Pérez de Cuellar being abducted caused him to stop that process. It manipulated these leaders into going onto a war footing. And he confessed to me that the reason he was funding the work of the abduction groups was because they wanted to put information out to the public that would scare the public so that people would make the sacrifice in blood and treasure to have an interplanetary war. Now, this is 25 years ago. It was not a happy meeting for me.
If there's any one thing that is going to mobilize people to allow the national security state to establish full spectrum dominance over our planet, it is this. The beings themselves, interestingly enough and very importantly, aren't putting out their own story. They're not doing that yet. They're trying to get us to understand it. They're trying to give us warnings. They're trying to help raise our consciousness, which is a critical part of this entire operation going on, and trying to get us to do this for ourselves. That's what this is all about. But the national security state realizes that that's a slower process, so they're now trying to hurry this up. There's a kind of an emergency process underway right now. Make no mistake about that.
When I was briefing the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the very first thing he asked wasn't about this subject. He looked at me, he says, "Dr. Greer, what we don't understand is why you haven't killed yourself yet." He said, "Well, my dad knew about some of this way back in the 60s. No one would do anything about it. So he took his revolver and ate his gun and blew his head off." Now, this is a 3-star general telling me this story in the first 10 minutes we're together. I said, "Well, I'm sorry that happened to you, but I understand where your dad was coming from." Because it's sort of this, anyway.
Oh, take a breath.
Now, the truth is, there are a lot of people who've been on my team who are military, who've killed themselves, others who've been assassinated. So the other thing that keeps me up is, survivor guilt.
Sorry. This national security state is the bane of our human existence right now. And so we have to start disassembling that national security state because, even assuming, say, Bernie Sanders, hypothetically, were to become president, the national security state isn't even going to tell him where the washrooms are. That whole group is going to descend upon him, and they're going to give him at least as much trouble as they've given Trump.
If you got into the office and you found out something about aliens, if you found out something about UFOs, would you let us know?
Well, I'll tell you, my wife would demand that I let you know.
So that's why they want Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to come in and kind of, continue to get things, quote, back to normal, where the national security state is functioning. They're all operation, they're all going to brief Goldman Sachs, and they're putting people from Goldman Sachs in charge of the economy, that kind of thing. We have to rise above those kind of dialectical politics, bring the people up, raise the consciousness of the people, and have this function through democracy. We've got the tools here. They're in front of us, and we've got access to the internet still. They haven't taken that away from us yet, but there's a short window here.
One exception to the almost universal failure of world governments to initiate peaceful diplomacy with ET civilizations took place in France in 2007. Then President Sarkozy's Ministry of Defense reached out to Dr. Greer to train its senior officials in the close encounters of the fifth kind protocols. During a covert test run in the French countryside, ET craft were tracked overhead going 200,000 kilometers per hour. And this massive mauve-colored craft partially materialized a few meters from the group. Since the operation was swiftly halted by national security state interests, it remains the duty of we the people to become peaceful ambassadors to the universe. Much like a denial of service cyber attack can bottleneck and bring down a computer network, millions of people initiating contact would completely overwhelm the national security state's ability to subvert disclosure.
The national security state people, and potentially working with and through the To the Stars Academy, are going to be pitching this problem. Saying, we can't just let our whole civilization know that there's this highly advanced, technologically superior society out there, and because our whole culture will collapse. Whereas, in fact, it's quite clear that it's their defense of the elite this 1% of the human family that basically ends up controlling over 40% of all of the wealth on the planet that they're really defending. And it's their world that they're trying to defend. So that you see that this is a subset of a larger question about how spiritual consciousness and the evolution of consciousness, of understanding what we really are in the makeup of the universe, is a threat in itself to this elite. Because that is the dissolving away of these kind of differences among ourselves, and this coming into a full ownership of our proper place in the universe puts these people out of business as the ruling elite. And so that the raising of consciousness of our human family is so closely related to the opening onto the extraterrestrial experience that both of them together are viewed as a threat by the elite. What they're afraid of is that this is such an accelerator as people have these repeated contacts with the extraterrestrials, their whole consciousness starts to rise. They start becoming aware of the fact that we're damaging our environment. They can become aware of the fact that nuclear weapons are kind of an insane thing to have. War is a really bad idea. This is a spiritual experience. It's a spiritual stimulation that's coming.
If you take someone from Italy and someone from Japan, very different cultures, very different people, personalities, backgrounds, emotional temperament. Now, extrapolate that out across the cosmos. Think of the vast differences there are going to be. How do we make any sense of that if we aren't anchored into something deeper? And that point of commonality has been folded within each of us. And that is, we are awake, conscious beings. They are awake, we are awake. That faculty of being aware of awareness, the consciousness, not what you're conscious of, but the means to be awake. That is a singularity. And once we're anchored into that state of consciousness, the unitive state, then there aren't any aliens. There are just other people who are a little different from us. This is the point where we can make contact most easily.